killer whales, the most fearsome and artful hunters in the sea. They dominate the ocean just as man dominates the land. And when man meets killer whale on the frontier between land and sea, they seem to be almost as interested in us as we are in them. Their high intelligence, of which this curiosity is but one sign, has led them to colonize every ocean on Earth. Like wolves, they hunt in packs, and they have developed an extraordinary range of hunting techniques that enable them to catch whatever prey they find. Nothing is safe from killer whales, not the smallest herring nor the largest seal. They are the wolves of the sea. All along the Pacific coast of Northwest America, from Alaska south to British Columbia, the ocean is bordered by high mountain ranges. Glaciers flowing down the flanks of these great mountains have carved out huge valleys. At the end of the last ice age, when the level of the seas rose, the lower parts of these valleys were flooded and became long, deep fjords. Off the coast in early summer, salmon gather before starting their annual journey up the rivers to spawn. And as they arrive, so do the killers. These particular killer whales specialize in hunting salmon, and they know exactly where and when to go in order to intercept the shoals. The salmon are making their way up the flooded valleys towards the particular rivers in which they were born. Sea lions are already there, waiting for them. But the salmon's greatest enemies are humans and killer whales, and both are on their way in pursuit of them. They're travelling up Johnston Strait between Vancouver Island and the mainland of British Columbia. The strait is a major pathway for the salmon. As the fish swim along it, they run straight into the nets that the fishermen have set in their path. The haul is so rich that there's plenty for everyone. And these days, the fishermen don't shoot the whales as they once did, but allow them to take a share. 16 groups of whales come each summer to the strait. Each group, or pod, often about 20 strong, is an extended family, usually containing 3 generations, a grandmother, her sons and daughters, and her daughter's offspring. The whales have good eyesight, but often the water is so murky they need another way of navigating and finding their prey. And they use sonar, emitting a stream of clicking sounds and listening to the echoes. A pod swims along Johnston Strait in a spread-out formation, each whale listening to the echoes of its own clicks and those produced by its companions. The salmon, travelling in shoals, have a characteristic swimming pattern which produces a particular kind of sonar reflection. Once the whales have found a shoal, they don't herd the fish as a group, but chase them individually. As one closes in on a fish, it often switches off its sonar and uses its eyes to make the catch. A group of researchers here in British Columbia has been studying these whales for over 20 years. John Ford is one of the founder members.
I'm fascinated by the animals for many different reasons. There's so much mystery to them. There's so many questions that we are striving to answer that it's enough to keep you motivated for years.
John's special interest is the killer's use of sound. He's found out that, as well as the clicks for locating fish, they make other calls to communicate with each other.
In a way, it is their own kind of unique language, but it's not a language like humans have. We shouldn't expect them to have nouns and verbs like we do, because it's how they make the calls that seems to convey the really important information that the animals need in order to lead their lives.
By using an underwater microphone, John has discovered that each family pod has its own unique vocabulary, its own dialect, as it were. He and his colleagues have named each pod with a letter of the alphabet, and he can immediately recognize which group is calling.
H is the only pod that makes that form of call. There it is again. It's a really strong descending tone that is classically H. And that's another very distinctive H call.
He can also identify and sex each adult in a pod by the markings on its fin and the shape of the saddle-like patch on its back. And each has been given a number.
Oh, it's A6 and it looks like A38. Often they come under and investigate the hydrophone underwater. Oh, looks like A39.
Those with very tall fins are mature males. Killers are the largest of the dolphins, up to 30 feet long and weighing as much as 7 tons. They can live for over 40 years, and the females produce their first young at about 15.
When a calf is born into a pod of killer whales, it grows up with the sounds that have developed over generations in that group. They become fixed into their memory, and those are the calls that that individual will make for its life.
This year, I-15 pod has a calf with them that John hasn't seen before.
Here's the little guy rolling around with its mother. You can see it's really young, probably only a few weeks or maybe a month old, because of the very patchy, mottly gray coloration on its back. It's really typical for the young calves to shed a lot of their skin not long after birth. We're all having a look around, it seems. Here's the little guy.
These killers have an extraordinary social system. The calves, even the males, stay in the same pod with their mothers throughout their lives. That raises the question of how they avoid inbreeding. The answer may lie with the social gatherings that form in Johnston Strait in late summer, when the salmon season is almost over and the whales are well fed. They seem to be in a boisterous mood. There's a great deal of excited calling, and they're likely to play with any object they come across, even a jellyfish. Individuals from different families rub shoulders, literally. Now would be the time when a male could mate with a female from another pod. But unexpectedly, many of the sexually active groups that form during these big assemblies consist entirely of males. This is one, swimming upside down in the mating position.
One of the more peculiar behaviors of killer whales is the sexual play that goes on among males in pods and males from different pods when
pods are traveling together. This may go on for hours at a time with males rolling over each other, usually with erections, and sometimes it gets fairly physical with animals jumping out of the water and rolling and tussling with each other. We don't really know what the function of the interactions are, but it seems to be where the big mature bulls, through various sexual displays or physical displays, demonstrate that they are dominant over others that might be competing with them for access to breeding females.
After a hectic bout of socializing like this, some of the whales will often head for a particular rocky beach on Vancouver Island. Tidal currents have here created a bed of uniformly sized pebbles, and this seems to have an irresistible attraction to the whales. Apparently, rubbing themselves along it gives them a most delectable sensation. Even when the salmon season is at its height, they will break off from foraging as often as 4 or 5 times a day to come here and rub themselves. The early whale researchers first observed this behaviour in 1973, but local fishermen say that whales were here doing this long before that. The whales reduce their buoyancy by expelling air from their blowholes, so that streams of bubbles are continually blistering the water. The whales have probably been indulging in these massages generation after generation. And this practice, like their hunting techniques, must be counted as one of the cultural traditions of the Johnston Strait Killers. While this is going on, very remarkably, their calls change, as John Ford has discovered.
They make all sorts of strange squeaks and squawks, kinds of sounds that you never hear repeated in the same form. And occasionally out will pop a call, usually rather a poor imitation of a call, that belongs in a different dialect.
By the end of summer, the party is over in Johnston Strait. The salmon runs have finished, and the killer whales spread out along the coast of British Columbia. Fattened by the bounty of summer, they're now ready to cope with winter, when fish will be more difficult to find. But there are other flushes of plenty in the annual cycle of this coast. In the early spring, when the phase of the moon and the water temperature are just right, schools of herring migrate inshore to spawn. They come in millions and are met by schools of hungry dog shark. Rhinoceros auklets, the Northern Hemisphere's equivalent of penguins, join in the feast. The killer whales of British Columbia seldom bother with these smaller fish, but on the other side of the world, on the west coast of Norway, Other killer whales have a different tradition, and they rely on herring as a major part of their diet. Here in early winter, huge pods of up to 50 individuals move into the fjords to hunt. Herring from the North Atlantic come to these sheltered waters to overwinter in vast shimmering clouds. Instead of using their speed to catch individual fish, as their salmon-hunting cousins do in Johnston Strait, the killers here use their skills as communicators and operate as a team. The herring are widely dispersed in quite deep water, and the killers concentrate them by swimming around the school in ever-tightening circles. As they work, they signal to one another with high-pitched calls. They flash their white flanks, which seems to terrify the herring and deters them from breaking through the cordon of encircling whales. Like wolves herding a mob of caribou, the whales concentrate the shoal into a tight ball and drive it closer and closer to the surface. While some whales continue to keep the shoal herded together, others move into it and stun the fish with powerful flicks of their huge tail. The 3-ton whales then start delicately to pick up the half-pound herrings one by one. An adult male will consume 400 or more in a day. The whale's killing technique is so effective that there are plenty of dead herring left over for other creatures, such as Atlantic cod and the ever-present gulls. Fish-eating whales like these in Norway hunt in large cooperative teams. But there are smaller groups elsewhere whose strategies are very different. They specialize in hunting warm-blooded prey, seals, dolphins, and other whales. These other killer whales have spread to every corner of the seas in their search for food. One of the most isolated communities of all has only recently been discovered around a group of tiny islands in the southern Indian Ocean. Southeast of the Cape of Good Hope, on the edge of the Antarctic, lie the Crozet Islands. It's one of the most lonely and inhospitable places in all the world, for much of the year lashed by ferocious gales. Every spring, particular groups of killers arrive here in anticipation of a great feast to come. There are so few islands in this vast expanse of ocean that when the breeding season arrives, the beaches become densely crowded by penguins and seals seeking a place for their young. Human hunters once came here as well to slaughter the seals for oil. But now Christophe Guillet is one of only a few regular human visitors. He's spent the past 4 seasons on the main island, Possession, recording the daily activities of the whales. He lives for weeks on end in this small hut.
When I was a kid, I always had the dream to study killer whales. I was fascinated by these animals because they are powerful hunters with a complex social life and highly intelligent. I really wanted to understand how these wonderful creatures live in a world that is so unknown to us.
An underwater microphone out in the bay transmits the sounds of the marine world back to his hut, so he can keep track of the 18 whale families who come to the island. One of these, A-pod, is his main study group. Its male, A1, was first identified in 1972. Now he's in his 30s, and with him are 2 adult cows, each with a calf.
The youngest adult female, E03, is about 25 years old. E03 has a 6-year-old female calf, Zoe. The other adult female is A2. She's about 40 years old, and she has a big nick at the base of her fin. And she has 2 smaller ones at the top of the fin. A2 has a 7-year-old female calf, Mae.
Each spring, A-pod visits Bay Americaine. It has a gently sloping sandy beach and is protected from the prevailing westerlies, so it's an ideal location for an elephant seal colony, and it's that which attracts the whales. The female seals come ashore to give birth in late September. Skuas are always around such colonies, snapping up anything edible, alive or dead. They will even sip the rich milk seeping from a cow in labour. Most of the females give birth within 2 days of landing. Immediately after birth, mother and infant become bonded by their smell, appearance, and particularly the unique sound of each other's bark. The newborn seal must take on food as fast as possible, and fed by one of the richest of all milks, it will triple its weight in 3 weeks. Every few days, A-pod patrols the beach of Bay Americaine, checking on the progress of the colony.
It's very impressive to see the reaction of these male elephant seals watching this dorsal fin and moving up as fast as they can. They are really, really scared by killer whales. And also, as soon as the female will spot the killer whales, then the other female will start to watch around, and you can really feel the fear expressed by these elephant seals when they saw a dorsal fin.
It's now 3 weeks into the season, and the first seal pups have been weaned. Their exhausted mothers must now return to the sea to feed, but they're very weak, easy prey for the killer whales if they come within reach. The female seal knows that the killers are out there, and she stays within the protection of the shallow water, waiting for the best moment to run the blockade. Another cow's departure is complicated by her youngster's unwillingness to be abandoned.
The pup wanted to go with its mother, and apparently she had to go. And they were both moving along the shore and producing some noises, which were detected by the whales, which both of them converged towards this female and this pup. But as they were a bit too high on the beach, she managed to escape them.
The majority of the weaned pups have gathered in groups in the grass at the rear of the colony. They will stay on shore for the next 6 weeks, during which time their puppy fat will be converted into a thick layer of insulating blubber. Most afternoons, they visit a stream which flows down through the colony to the bay. Slowly, they acquire the swimming skills they will need in a few weeks' time in order to catch their prey, usually squid, which they will chase in the dim depths of the Southern Ocean. But to do that, they have to get past the waiting killer whales. On the seaward side of the bar across the mouth of the creek, the young killer whales of APOD are training for their part in this annual drama. They're being taught the technique of snatching a pup from the shallows. Their mothers are showing them how this can be done by pushing them ashore. Only the cows and calves of APOD take part in this beaching school, the young ones learning through imitation and the adults getting some practice. The male, A1, stays away from the beach. His job will be to patrol the entrance to the bay in deeper water and block off the escape of any seals that get past the beaching party. The technique they're practicing is a difficult and dangerous one. They have to throw themselves right out of the water if they're to have a good chance of grabbing a seal. The young calf, Zoe, has already got the basic idea. When king penguins appear in the shallows, the other calf, May, co-opts them into the training program by using them as targets. Now the weather is comparatively calm, but even so, beaching remains a risky business. A2 is obviously apprehensive, and as her calf May practices, she positions herself so that if May gets stuck, she can push her back into deeper water. A2 has good reason for being worried, for May did indeed get stuck a few years earlier. Christophe saw it happen.
In October 1988, we found the calf May stranded in Bay American. May was in a state of shock, lying motionless, calling to her mother, A2, who was patrolling along the shore. We tried to roll May back into the water, but her 500 kilograms were too much for us. We then decided to turn her head toward the sea, and each time a wave came, we pushed her a bit further. And rapidly, May understood what was happening, and she managed to cover the last few meters by herself.
Two years later, Christophe is back, and so is A2 and May. He had discovered that the whales are silent when hunting seals, and he suspected that they were listening for the noises seals make when entering the water. So when the whales were out in the bay, he imitated the splashing of a pup by stepping in the water.
Immediately a whale swam toward me. Very quickly the whale realized that I was different from a seal pup. I got the feeling that the whale was testing my reactions by opening its mouth, which is a threat. But on the other hand, on many occasions, I get the impression that they are just curious toward me and want to interact and play with me.
This inquisitiveness, this impulse to explore, is part of what makes them such successful and widespread hunters. Its curiosity satisfied, the whale makes off. 3 kilometers east of the main elephant seal colony, another protected beach provides 40,000 king penguins with a breeding site. They are another potential source of food for A pod. There's a small colony of elephant seal here as well. These brown chicks were hatched 10 months ago. They will soon have to leave and start feeding for themselves. Already, they're losing their down and sprouting their seagoing feathers. On each side of the king penguin colony lies a patch of water where the killer whales like to swim and rest. And this area is visited by A pod almost daily during the seal hunting season. It was first discovered in 1986, and Christoph spends many hours here observing the whales.
This place is really unique. I mean, on Crozet, it's the place where the whales will come and rest and relax. And you will see them spending, at this time of the year, spending hours and hours just turning around. And it is on this side of the bay, it will be mostly the females, E03 and E02, which will spend most part of their time. And I mean, it's unique. You can just see them running along the rocks and spending quite a bit of time turning around.
Even when the calves are several years old, they still keep close to their mothers. May idles along right under her mother's body, as she did when she was a nursing calf, reaffirming the close bond between them.
A pod spends as much as 20% of the day in this place to rest and play. It is a very important place for them, part of the cultural tradition of the pod, which is used generation after generation. And I'm pretty sure that in 20 years' time, the calves will still be using this area in the same way as their mothers do now.
A big part of the attraction is the kelp. Just as the whales of Vancouver Island enjoy a pebble massage, so these seem to love having their backs stroked by the long fronds. By early summer, the young elephant seals are beginning to gather along the shoreline, just near the killer whale's rest area. Here, they have a good chance of picking up any pups that are incautious enough to stray into deeper water. The pups will soon have to go to sea to feed, but they will have to break through the killer's blockade, just as their mothers did 6 weeks earlier. Meanwhile, for the whales, there's an endless supply of smaller prey, king penguins from the nearby colony. Adults going for a wash are joined by the newly fledged young, now in their seagoing plumage and taking to the water for the first time. Those adults with chicks that still need looking after are setting off for their feeding grounds, which lie 600 kilometers farther south towards the Antarctic. These busy corridors present the whales with an endless procession of potential food. Suddenly, a pod shows itself, and the adult penguins scatter in panic. But the youngsters, getting their first sea experience, don't realize what danger they're in. Some shelter among the kelp fronds. May is using a crippled penguin to practice her hunting skills. It's a game of life and death. Death inevitably for the penguin, but life for May. For unless she becomes an expert hunter very quickly, she will not survive long. The giant petrels, the vultures of the ocean, know there are likely to be tasty pickings when killer whales are about, and they follow them around in anticipation of a few scraps. Having played with the penguin like a cat with a mouse, May abandons it to the petrels. Every 10 days or so, great gales sweep into the bay, whipping up waves 10 feet high. But such conditions don't hamper the activities of the killer whales. May takes advantage of the surf to get an extra turn of speed as she chases some adult penguins returning from a feeding trip. The hapless loser becomes a toy as the winner tosses it into the air with a clout of her great tail. After the gale passes, cold air from the Antarctic races in from the southwest, bringing squalls and flurries of snow. The penguins, both adult and chicks, huddle together in groups, giving one another what protection they can from the bitter wind. The elephant seals sit out the storm, protected by their thick layer of blubber. And Christoph continues his observations, recording the whale's behavior, whatever the conditions. The next depression brings torrential rain, and heavy runoff floods the river. The current in the swollen river is now so strong that some of the inexperienced young seals are swept downstream before they realize what is happening. But the whales know well enough. Years of experience have taught them that heavy rains at this time of the year will bring a feast, and they gather around the river mouth to collect it. The seal pups do have some protection. The flooded river waters are laden with sediment. That and the turbulence make it difficult for the whales to see or hear the pups, and some do escape. But with their reserves of fat running low, the young seals have to try and reach the open sea. The high water in the wake of the storm allows the killer whales to get close enough inshore to use the beaching technique they've been practicing for the last few weeks. The females of A pod patrol the shallows. Every now and then, one of them surfaces briefly to check on the position of the seals. Then comes the attack. A3 hurls herself up the beach to grab a pup. She only just gets a grip on it. This is a very dangerous place for her, and she has to retreat. But she manages to drag the pup with her. A-pod's success rate when hunting in this way is very low, only one pup for every 20 hours of patrolling. But elsewhere in the world, other families using similar methods are more successful. "8,000 kilometers to the west of the Crozets, another population of killer whales has discovered an even more favorable place for beaching. Here, on the coast of Argentina, there are many bays with pebbled shores that are much steeper than the shelving beach of Bay Americaine in the Crozets, so there's much less chance of a beaching whale getting stranded. The daily drama starts in Medina Bay at low tide with a practice session. These whales have been studied for several years, and they too have been given names. Blanche is an adult female and the most experienced beacher, and Serge, the young male with her, is also very accomplished. The steepness of the beach allows them to arch their bodies so they can pivot on their belly and slide back on the next wave. Several kilometers along the coast from the practice beach is the first of 5 sea lion colonies. At low tide, an exposed reef provides good protection for the sea lions, and the pups can play safely in the pools left by the outgoing water. But the tidal range is enormous, and when the water begins to flow back, the protecting reefs are soon submerged. The killer whales know that now they can get across the reef. First to make the dash are 2 brothers who have been hunting here for 17 years. That distinctive bent fin belongs to the younger of the 2, Big Mel, who is 20. That's brother Bernard, older by 10 years. As the whales angle in towards the beach, they listen for the splashing of the unsuspecting pups. Having spotted their quarry, the brothers seem to employ a decoy strategy. Mel sails past in full view. Behind him comes Bernard, angling his tall fin downwards to remain inconspicuous. Bernard remains silent except for an occasional sonar click and a grunt-like signal which sometimes precedes an attack. A youngster further along the beach is oblivious of the danger. A successful attack needs precise judgment. And even Big Mel often misses. Bernard's bow wave of clear water acts like a lens through which he can see his target. Mel and Bernard's immense bodies need a lot of feeding. Each has to eat 3 pups a day to keep up his energy. As high tide approaches, the whales move several kilometers along the coast to the last of the colonies. Here, 2 reefs running out from the shore form a channel 100 meters wide. The adult sea lions have to get across it if they're to reach their feeding grounds out at sea. Pups often follow their parents across this channel, and it's here at high water that Serge and Blanche get their best hunting. As they swim in over the top of the reef, they drop down into the deeper water of the channel, an ideal place for an ambush. Like their cousins in the crozets, the whales use their sharp sense of hearing to detect the swimming noise of the sea lions. Remarkably, Blanche can tell the difference between adult and baby sea lions by the splashing sound they make, even in rough water like this, and she closes in for the kill. The 2 brothers also have a game plan. Mel is the better hunter and usually leads the attack, while Bernard stays behind to pick up any confused pups that, in their panic, try to swim out to sea. This time, Bernard is lucky. As the successful hunters toy with their still-living victim, clouting it with their tails like the Norwegian killers stunning the herring, the underwater world rings with their loud, excited calls. This cavorting with their prize may look like a display of wild triumph, but it is certainly also a way for the younger members of the team to practice the skills needed for the chases that later in the year they will have to make in the open sea. And then, when young and old have shared the catch and eaten their fill, there comes a most unexpected incident. Their last catch is not killed, but carried gently back to the shore and set free. Is this an act of mercy, or is it just part of play behavior? Who can say? How can one enter the mind of a killer whale? That these whales are highly intelligent is clear from the fact that each community around the world has developed its own vocabulary of sounds and its own skills and traditions. As we watch them, we might think that we can detect signs of anger, pleasure, and curiosity in their behavior. But notions of morality, of good and evil, we should not attribute to them. Those are the product of the human mind. We shouldn't regard the killers as either cruel or merciful. They are what they are, magnificent animals that must kill to live.